Okay, everybody, welcome to the second in our series on thinking with Newman. Myself and Gary are delighted to welcome you again and to welcome our panelists this evening. As we did last week, we're just going to cut straight into it. And the one thing we'll guarantee you is we will have you out of here within an hour. So as I say, we'll just kick straight on into it. Gary.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. As you know, we're looking at another topic of the vision of a university. We're going to turn first to Father Tyson. Father Tyson, you worked many years as a professor, administrator at the University of Notre Dame. You were 13 years president of Portland during its renaissance of the 1990s and early 2000s. You then followed that with 9 years as provincial of the Holy Cross United States province, where you had some oversight of 4 institutions of higher education, and you now serve in your third year as president at the Holy Cross College. Your time, especially at Portland and Holy Cross, really does witness to your abiding concern for institutional mission and values. And I think your professional capacity as an organizational theorist really does help you to assess the structures necessary and the people necessary for implementing what we call a Newmanian vision of higher education. With all of that as a huge preamble, could you speak to what you consider the import of a vision in the milieu of higher education today?
Sure. Well, certainly the vision for higher education today is a complex one. And in many respects, Catholic higher education, in my view, is more and more distinctive because it is unlike a great deal of the rest of the arena or universe of higher education. I have spent my really entire priesthood in higher education, and probably in preparation for today, my reflection upon my time at the University of Portland and here at Holy Cross College was poignant for me because of the 2 distinct institutional types, but yet with the same value structure and the same foundational values, not only from our congregational charism, but clearly from what I believe is Cardinal Newman's idea of a Catholic university. University of Portland is a comprehensive university with a College of Arts and Sciences, 4 professional schools, is doctoral granting at the level of professional degrees. And Holy Cross College is a small bona fide liberal arts college with between 500 and 600 students, and is very different in that it was once a junior college, and it then became primarily a commuter college, and now is a residential college. And we have what is called a diverse curricular structure, in that we have students that are 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, and 1 year with us. What I'd like to do is to really almost now, so we can have conversation, tick off 4 areas that I think really reflect the values of Cardinal Newman, and really, for the most part, are at least the ideals that I think most Catholic colleges and universities would hold. The first thing I want to talk about is what Father Chamberland alluded to. I'm kind of known in our community as the mission guy. I would say at the most macro level, the issue of mission for any university, but particularly a Catholic university, is twofold. One is the more macro issue that has to do with the mission of Catholic education, higher education within the church, what that means as an ecclesial community. And I think it's very simple. It is basically a mission that is the apostolic mission of the gospel. And that apostolic mission is to go and teach all nations. Then there's the institutional mission. They're very diverse. In this day and age, a mission is not a vision. If you would look at, I've taught corporate strategy. If you look at strategic management, vision is different than mission. Mission is what we are right now, not necessarily where we're going. I think that mission diffusion and mission dilution are problems in all of higher education today, that institutions have trouble being laser focused on what their institutional purpose is. So I would say clarity, conciseness, actually transparency of mission. Institutions get confused between marketing and reality, and sometimes transparency eludes them. And also in the Catholic world, I believe the value of distinctiveness and transformative institutions are critical at two levels. One is the one of knowledge as Catherine Tillman said, precious in itself. And the other is where the Catholic character comes in, which engages the dialogue between faith and reason, and how that intersection can actually be where we find truth in the academic endeavor. So I think being distinctive and transformative, if I'm out on the road helping another institution, I use those two things as almost a mantra for them. To put it in its simplest terms, the mission is the raison d'etre for the college or university's endeavors. I've referred to it sometimes as the ballpark in which we play the game, and we stay in the baselines. So that's first mission. The other is a unified and integrated knowledge, which clearly is very much John Cardinal Newman, and also something that I believe is important in any liberal arts education or a liberal education, and it should be supported by a curricular structure. I tend to use the word unified more than integrated. I like the circle of knowledge image, but we do have structures that sometimes within an undergraduate education can be siloed, and we don't intend it, but we just kind of expect that there would be some sort of synergy that would go on. And I think that sometimes we have to work at that. So let me use Holy Cross for a second. We redid our core curriculum. In my view, that core is, and if I used a bicycle wheel, the hub, and the departments are the spokes. At the University of Portland, the core was the hub, and the professional schools were the spokes. And so the core is responsible for a certain kind of engendering of learning that makes us, in my view, the most humane. It involves the humanities and philosophy and theology and culture and language. We don't always do it well because we don't see it unified. At Portland, we basically tell students that we will provide them opportunities that when they graduate, they will have engendered 4 things. It's called the Core 4. And that is basically to be scholars, leaders, citizens, and disciples. The students know that. They talk about it. It comes up in their classroom. We're small, so we can do this pretty easily. It's been wonderful. Interdisciplinary studies is part of that integrated knowledge. I think that it needs a lot of work in some places because interdisciplinary studies oftentimes becomes hybrid courses. And we're 12 credit hours of this, 12 credit hours of that, and all of a sudden you have business communications as opposed to disciplines collaborating together. Specialized study, and then senior capstone. It's very hard, I understand, in places as large as our sister institution, but I have experienced here what we call the senior capstone. It is an integrated and synthesis presentation on the part of every graduating senior. It's juried by faculty and by members of the South Bend community, and anybody can come to it. I literally have seen over the few years I've been here, 18-year-olds become adults when they are giving that presentation. It's a semester-long preparation with the faculty member. The third thing is something that could be considered a little controversial, but nonetheless, I think it's important to what Newman was even grappling with at that time in his time. And that is the concept of the common good, or within the Catholic community, communio, how that influences how we learn and how we communicate, versus an academic freedom that sometimes becomes confused with a very radical autonomy. And I can say more about that at a later time, because people might think I'm saying something I'm really not. I do believe that communio in a Catholic university, or in really any university, but to use the word communio or common good, either will work, is that it's not only common good for us as a community, a learning community and an intellectual community, but it's also part of a contribution and almost a gift we can give in our immediate communities and even abroad. And finally, the fourth thing is, for at least undergraduate education, the whole value of residentiality. It's interesting that the United States has struggled for years of trying to balance the British residential model and the German research model in the same institutions. It comes off pretty well, but I've never seen the ideal. But what I do see in residence hall living is not only the possibility, but I've seen it be real, of becoming the whole idea of common living as a crossroads for that synthesis and integration of all different kinds of knowledge, of being an academic community, of being a faith community, of being a social community and a formation community within a living context that is very familiar to them. And it's probably where they are professors to one another in the best sense of that word. So I'm stopping there. That's
okay,
the
all right. Well, yes, I think that's an area we'd love to come back to, that integrative place where students rub shoulders with one another. But
yeah, but perhaps, Father Tyson, that's a brilliant overview. You gestured at the beginning towards saying that you think maybe there's an opportunity or a space or a necessary kind of presence for a distinctively Catholic approach to these things, because it differentiates us. Do you want to develop that point, please?
Yes. Not only do I think that there's an opening or a possibility, I think really where it doesn't happen is really probably the Catholic university's fault. And I don't mean that in an indicting sense. But I've always thought that sometimes we're still trying very hard to legitimize ourselves in a secular society. And so, for example, when I went to Portland, we whispered that we were Catholic. And when I left there 13 years ago, it was on all of our literature, the University of Portland, Oregon's Catholic University. It can minimally be a descriptor, and also can describe a part of learning and even research where issues of God and reason fit together. So I think there's a huge place that needs to be there for Catholic colleges and universities, as not parochial at all.
Great, and we'll let Kathleen Sprows Cummings in now, who's one of our most distinguished women leaders in the University of Notre Dame. And I want to ask Kathleen, you know, we're obviously involved with the idea of a Catholic university, right? And you're a senior leader at Notre Dame, which is also a Catholic university. But how does a university reconcile the challenges today in keeping the kind of the mission and the values in a kind of a fruitful balance with the demand that parents and students and professors and all of us, other people in the university, have, that we are, you know, the very best disciplines that we can be, the very best scholars that we can be, and that we can kind of, as it were, punch our weight up against the universities which don't have our Catholic values. So how do we negotiate that tension or that balance? Do you find that a productive one, or do you find it a difficult one to manage?
Well, I find it an enormously helpful conversation, and I just wanted to start by thanking you for sponsoring these dialogues. To pick up on something Archbishop Martin said last week, he talked about Newman believing that education happens in God's time, and that really stayed with me. And I think it also applies to canonization. Newman's cause took a very long time, longer than it should have perhaps when measured in human time. But I think when we look at it in terms of God's time, he was canonized in just the months before the biggest crisis to hit university education in a very long time. And all these conversations I know are prompted by the first year anniversary of that canonization. I do think there are challenges in maintaining, as you said, a fruitful balance between fidelity to a Catholic mission and then committing to becoming a great research university. And I think Newman would have something to say on each of what I see as three challenges I'll talk about. The first is simply that Catholic colleges and universities in the United States are coming from behind when it comes to their secular counterparts. And I think of John Tracy Ellis's 1955 article on American Catholics and the Intellectual Life, where he quotes Newman extensively and makes parallels between what Newman was trying to do with the Catholic University of Ireland and the challenges of US Catholic universities. That American Catholics, in large part because of their immigrant background, had not invested in higher education or viewed success as becoming doctors and lawyers and pursuing money perhaps over pursuing the intellectual life. So I think that Catholic universities and colleges are coming from behind in a way and trying to get the resources and the reputation of some of our secular counterparts. And I think that was a challenge that Newman was well aware of and has a lot to say. And I couldn't agree more with Father Tyson about the importance of maintaining the Catholic tradition and not looking to secular universities to legitimize ourselves, but looking to our tradition. Another big challenge that I see, not only at my home institution, but many places, is how to balance maintaining an authenticity to the founding charisms of the congregation, and also empowering people to be, the lay people to become leaders, something that Newman would have applauded. How do you recognize the leaders that are members of Holy Cross, the leaders that are Jesuits at Jesuit universities, while also drawing lay people into that charism? How do you have a preferential option for those members of the founding congregation, which you should have, without reinforcing clericalism? How do you engage non-Catholic faculty in the charism? And of course, how do you engage students in that? And I think we're doing wonderful things at Notre Dame through the first year program, the Moreau program. I know that students here know more about Basil Moreau than they've ever known before. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. I think perhaps the biggest influence Newman can have today is that when you engage him seriously, I think it renders moot some of the conversations we have about what should and should not be studied in a Catholic university. I think Father David was alluding to this too. For Newman, he believed deeply in the indivisibility of secular and theological knowledge, and believed that both were crucial for a university. And I think what I admire most about his writing is his confidence that no scientific or any other sort of discovery could ever undermine Catholic truth. Not in itself unusual, perhaps, but what was unusual was Newman's patience with this. He was willing to wait even for generations that what could be seen as a contradiction would resolve itself. He was much more liberal than some of his counterparts in admitting things. And I think we have something to learn from that today, from his willingness to engage in critical conversation with his own tradition and his willingness to engage things that might be seen to be in conflict with it.
Great, thank you. Kathleen, maybe before we move on, I know that you were a part of the core curriculum review committee at Notre Dame. Could you speak a little bit to the updating? And that's a difficult process at every school if you're going through a curriculum review. But could you speak a little bit to where you think we came out on that, and especially with concerns for this kind of integrated sensibility, and especially Catholicism across the courses in the curriculum?
Thank you. Yes, I'm the chair of our committee on Catholicism and the disciplines, which can replace the second philosophy requirement in the old curriculum. And what the thinking behind this curriculum revision was that Catholicism should be infused throughout all the disciplines, and Catholicism can help us understand disciplines and vice versa. So courses that fulfill the CAD requirement are very clear about how this interdisciplinary conversation works, this back and forth between Catholicism and a particular discipline. It engages readings from the Bible or the Catholic tradition on the syllabus, and we define the Catholic tradition very capaciously. And it requires students to articulate and defend a position on a faith or a normative question. So for example, I teach a course called Notre Dame in America, which is a history course. It talks about Notre Dame in the context of the nation and the various intersections. But the question that students examine is it possible to be a great research university and a great Catholic university? So the students are able to engage with that, and they read many documents from the tradition. And I think, again, like Newman, to trust in the students and to realize that they see, yes, they're here and they believe in the Catholic mission. They don't always know about it. That's our job to help teach them. But they also are very clear that they want degrees that are going to mean something, and they're going to set them up for success after graduation. So it's a wonderful approach. It's still, I have to say that it's still emerging. We have lots of CAD courses that are in the disciplines you might expect, like history, like mine. It's a bit slower going to get them in the sciences. We have them in the business school, but again, how to get faculty who might not see themselves as contributing to the Catholic mission, how to help them see that they are in fact doing that. And I think Newman can be a guide here.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. Kathleen, can I ask you, this is a kind of an Irish-based question really, because you're also among your many other wonderful feathers you have in your cap. Another beautiful feather you have is that you're an expert on the history of women's religious congregations in the Catholic Church. And of course, here in Ireland, we had many of those who were brilliantly contributive to providing education to Irish people at a time when that wasn't available to them through any other channel. Now we have a kind of situation in recent years, obviously, where we've had a crisis of vocations. Many of those schools, the Mercy and Presentation, my own one, the Faithful Companions of Jesus, many of them now have difficulties in terms of recruitment, but they're still running schools, but they've moved over to, as it were, a lay leadership. Now, how do you maintain the charism? How do you maintain the distinctiveness of the Catholic tradition? How do you maintain, you talk beautifully there now, but students of Notre Dame know more about moral, and we're obviously talking about Newman. But how is it possible, in your opinion, to transfer the charism from those, religious sisters and great educationists and founders? How is it possible to kind of translate that once the actual religious community itself disappears, as it were?
Well, I certainly hope it's possible, or we're all in trouble. But yes, I do believe it's absolutely possible. I do think the women were a bit ahead of the men on this question because their numbers declined more dramatically. And I think in terms of at least the Catholic women's colleges in this country, I think the women religious, and in Ireland too, the women religious were thinking far out ahead on this question. Of course, a plug for my own discipline in history, in actually reading material written and I would like to see, in terms of capstone courses all over at Catholic universities, much more serious engagement with the founders in the way that for centuries, members of religious communities, their postulants, their novices studied the founder. I think we could replicate that better than we've done. So I think that's really important. I'm just thinking, Kevin, another course I teach that fulfills the CAD requirement is called Faith and Feminism in America. And this was a response to students when I would teach courses in women's history and in Catholic history. They would say to me, mostly female students, but also male students, how can we reconcile these two things, my Catholic faith and yet my growing attachment to feminism, which happens. So to go back to the CAD course, we talk about what feminism actually is and has been historically, not as it's defined in popular culture, not as it's defined by its enemies, but by reading actual feminist writings. And one of the key sources for that is to look at the work of women religious in this country, women who didn't necessarily call themselves feminists, but were certainly educating and enlarging women's lives long before women under secular auspices were doing that. And again, they have to defend a position. Is it possible to be, in many of their cases, a faithful Catholic and a feminist? And many of them do write very passionately after learning the history of like many of the women that you just talked about. So yes, I think it's possible. And I think again, the women, we have a lot to learn from women's congregations on this. They have, I think, developed models for successfully communicating, for inviting lay members into the charism and recognizing lay leadership. Not inviting the lay leaders in as second-class citizens, but as partners. And again, that's something Newman was very, very strong on the need to empower the laity to be real leaders.
Great. We're now going to turn to Aisling MacRunnels, and Aisling has made a journey that millions of Irish people have made, which is to come from Ireland, from Greystone, San Wicklow, and end up in America and have a hugely successful trajectory in her career there, and is now a senior leader in a little place you might have heard of called Silicon Valley. But when Gary and I were putting this together, we kind of said, well, look, you know, it's no point in us just talking to ourselves, those of us who are in the Catholic education space, or, you know, we need people to kind of say, how does this operate outside the university circuit? So Aisling, I wanted to ask you specifically on that. We assigned an article by Janan Ganesh, which was talking about the pressure to work hard and to succeed and the drive that's needed nowadays to be successful in the business world, and the immense pressure that's on young people, you know, to be the best they can be, say things all the time, to be the best they can be, to work hard, to make a difference, all those kind of things. But he talks in that article that we recommended that can be both a liberation and a prison, that it can be both a pressure and a kind of something that drives them forward, but can also be a ball and chain that kind of drags them back as well. So I just want to ask you about that. In your world, what are you looking for? Like, what when you're hiring people, just coming from a Catholic university, it's a place like Notre Dame, does that add value from your point of view to the kind of people you might be looking for? And is there a place for a Newman-esque rounded individual in the cutthroat and hard-driving and fast-paced and challenging kind of business world today?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. First, I'm going to say my first introduction to Notre Dame was not a good one. When I came to America as just before my 18th birthday and went to college, and very homesick at times, and I would meet these people who were incredibly passionate. That the checkered pants should have been a good indication to me, but all of these passionate, loyal people who would come up to me and say, I'm Irish, and I get all excited to find out who, and then I'd find they were from this place in the Midwest called South Bend that I'd never heard of, and thought, what do they mean? In subsequent years, I have grown to absolutely appreciate those, the fighting Irish, and it's grown a strong place in my heart. So anyway, that's to tell you how I got introduced at first. So my perspective, Kevin, is very much one from Silicon Valley. So it doesn't necessarily represent all companies and all businesses. I'm in the heart of entrepreneurship and surrounded, and have been for many years now, by the startup culture. So as I speak to, what I think employers are looking for, you have to take it with that perspective a little bit. I'll honestly say that no, I have never seen on a job rec, or I've never written a job rec to say we need someone from a Catholic university or a Catholic college. Now, that doesn't go to say we haven't written requirements for job recs and we don't try to find people who have a lot of the skills that are synonymous, or the skills that both Father Tyson and Kathleen have been talking about here. So let me go into that. When, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think every college graduate coming to Silicon Valley had to go through a, math test, solving math equations, writing lines of code. It was all very, very technical in order to get a job in Silicon Valley. And that was in those, the early days as Facebook and Google and these companies were starting out. That was what they focused on. And I think there's a recognition happened about 2010 that we had gone way too far down that path towards just these myopic skills and not looking at a broader type of employee. I have to say, when I joined Sun Microsystems first in 1997, and Java was getting started, and I found myself in rooms with people, I literally thought these are the most brilliant people. These were the founders and creators of Java, etc. These are the most brilliant people I'd ever met. I was a little overwhelmed and intimidated by just how smart they were. And so but I listened and watched, because I couldn't do a whole heck of a lot else at the time, but listen and watch and try and learn. And a few weeks later, I realized these were also some of the most stupid people I had ever met, because again, they were very myopic in their perspective and in their skills. And that was what was in fact trending, to use a more recent word, basically at the time. By about 2010, we were starting to look not just at IQ, and people were starting in the Valley to look at more EQ as well, which was the emotional quotient, so that they could balance and get more humanity. That was a word that was maybe a trigger word put on it, but what they were really looking for was people who understood people who had more diversity in their thinking and in how they approached things. And so a lot of companies started to move in that way. Now, I will say, if you look at today, I think the Valley tends to agree with Ganesh to an extent on the talent is critical. So I absolutely believe that, the Valley, Silicon Valley definitely wants and loves and needs the talent. I've worked with many CEOs and GMs who I think it's maybe unique here, maybe not, but I call it the bozo switch, where if someone comes into a room and they present something and they don't get it, or they're asked a question, they don't get it. I think it's from the coding world, where a lot of engineers are senior leaders here. And so you've got the very black and white ones and zeros of the coding world. And I think that's the bozo switch, where, if you don't impress, you're out on the outs, and it's hard to get back in. But what I have found is that the bozo switch doesn't just base on intelligence, that they're really looking for that passion and the ability to understand what's going on, especially more and more as the consumerization of technology has happened, and technology is permeating our lives. And so you can't really build great technology without understanding humans and understanding humanity and actions. And so nowadays, I think there's a pragmatism that has set into the way we hire and how we look for people. Purpose is a word that I hear a lot. And for me, some of the things that, Father Tyson and Kathleen were talking about and have very elaborate language on, I would push a lot of it down to purpose, being able to recognize why you want to do something and to keep that purpose in mind, which I think as you're seeing privacy become important and all of these things that are playing out now, people who can understand and get that purpose, it becomes more and more important. And people are trying to write that into how they're hiring, and they're optimizing more for that. I'm not going to, put down Stanford. Stanford's a great university, and many friends and family members, but I've hired people who have been top of their class at Stanford in the past, and I've regretted it at times because they weren't able to jump in and be able to understand the full environment and be able to understand what we're trying to achieve and work with the same pragmatism and awareness and purpose that a more well-rounded student would have. So, if I wrap it up, I would say that yes, you've got the crazy geniuses like the Elon Musks of the world, and Silicon Valley is somewhat known for them. Usually, well, first I would say I'm not sure all of them. I wouldn't want to live his life. I'm not sure he's the happiest person. And so if you look for a balance of success and happiness, I think what you're going to find is there's a huge amount of leaders who really seek that well-roundedness in their work, in their lives, and in who they hire. And they're looking for that. And so again, I think times have changed. And I think that a lot of the values that you're talking about are very, very pertinent. That's not to say that I also think we're at a juncture And I think the burden is on all of us to actually do a lot better in how we bring some of those things, how we offer some of those things, bring them to the fore, and how we align on what is really needed and encourage that. Today, I think high school is incredibly stressful. High school has become about grades, not about learning. And I think that's a huge shame. In fact, I think college is one of the few places that people can now escape to actually have the luxury of total learning and immersing themselves in knowledge. And that's so critical and so important, and every educator should take it as a burden and an opportunity for them to actually expose these children, these becoming adults, to things that not only give them this ability to think at a higher level, but also to ground that in something that can really make a difference and help them and help the people around them. So interesting times, but I think, does that give you some idea of what we're looking for, Kevin, in Silicon Valley?
But isn't it a Chinese curse to say, may you live in interesting times?
Yeah. Yes. I was thinking, going back to Father Tyson, you've just heard Aisling, who is not only a corporate executive who would be hiring graduates of your institution, but also, I believe, represents the parents of those students who come to you. What do you hear in what he's saying that would be either a challenge or support how you think you go about educating a young person?
Well, first of all, I certainly resonate, not being in Silicon Valley, but having taught in the Mendoza, resonate with what Aisling is talking about. As you were speaking, I was thinking of my own return to the classroom after over 20 years. And I taught the Capstone class, which is required for any degree from the college, which is called strategic management. And I was engaged in this conversation with a group of seniors about this case. And all of a sudden, I don't know what it was, but I thought to myself, well, David, you were a new professor and taught their parents. And what's different now about this? I do think that there was a more, in the early 80s, there was more curiosity and leisure about learning in that age group. Whereas today, I think there is an urgency about production, about the second interview. A lot of what you're saying, Aisling. I thought to myself, David, I don't know if you're the professor mentor here. I think you're a vendor. And you have a product that these very bright students need, and they want you to deliver the product and move on. I didn't dwell on that because I found it very disheartening at the time, being in my ministry and profession. I do think that that is a problem. The whole higher education venture has been monetized. We can look at all the things parents complain about as value, the return on investment in the amount of tuition they pay. We have the federal government taxing universities with endowments over a certain height. So there is the culture of higher education, and even the culture as it's perceived from in itself sometimes is a little, it's like an infection. So I'm a pragmatist, very much so, but I am very hopeful, as Kathleen was pointing to, that we can get a hold of this. And that's the sort of thing that I think Catholic higher education can participate in. When students, when parents come to this to our college, we say to them, our educational process, we believe, is transformative and it's distinctive. We're 25% first generation college students, 1/3 students of color, 70% identify themselves as Catholic. But when I say that we're distinctively Catholic, I know I have to explain that. And so I say we're not a Catholic school. It's not about adoration. We're not a Catholic healthcare system. We're a college. What does that mean then to be distinctively Catholic? And that's when I talk about the Catholic intellectual tradition and how we learn here and how that was the Western. I do think that to take Silicon Valley and say that it's an aberration would probably be not the right thing to do, because I think there's pieces of that all over our culture. And I just think we, again, need the self-confidence to be willing to address it. The mission of Holy Cross College comes right from Father Moreau. It's 2 lines. We create global citizens with the competency to see and the courage to act. And I think that's what I believe is true about the educational endeavor.
And Ashton, can I? That's you know, where the, as we say in Ireland, that's where the rubber hits the road, really. But you know, Ashton, as well as being a business leader, you're also a parent, and you chose to, you know, Notre Dame for at least one of your children. What do you think Notre Dame parents are looking for if they send a child to Notre Dame? Or, you know, the most precious thing any of us have in our world, really, those of us who are lucky enough or unlucky enough to be parents, is our children. Right. So, you know, what was it that attracted you to send your, you know, to go to Notre Dame as a university you wanted to be involved with for your children's education?
So, Kevin, I'm not sure what kind of a parent you get to be, but I don't get to choose for my children. They very much get to choose for themselves. I only get to bring them up with values that I hope they choose well. So for my daughter, who, you know, very much, you know, born at Stanford and went to secondary school or high school in Palo Alto, and to a wonderful school that was, her school was not a Catholic school. She went Catholic elementary, and then she went to a secondary school that was not. And she wanted that community. For her, the strongest thing, and it's something we haven't really talked about yet, the thing she was really looking for, she would have defined it as community. And community, if I roll back, I have to say, community was something I took for granted a bit in Ireland. Community is something that's a bit innate for us all. We grew up, or most of us from Ireland grew up in places, we were lucky enough to grow up in places where we, you know, knew everyone, and everyone's mother knew everyone, and grandmother. Kevin, when I met you first, it turned out within 2 minutes of our conversation, you knew my aunt. And so, you know, we that sense of structure and caring and community that's built around us is critical, I think. When I came to America, I started to realize that people had to work hard for that over here. Such a huge country, the community is not necessarily innate. It's much more transient. And I actually think the whole world is more transient now. So what was even back in the early days isn't as strong, isn't, you know, as dominant in Ireland either. But coming here, I saw people working for it, and they worked for it through a sports team, you know, that they would support or something. Definitely saw it through churches combining. I mean, I think in California, you know, I admire all my Catholic friends here and everyone who goes to church, because we choose it and we really work for it. It's not innate in society, right? You have to actually opt in and really want it. So I see people defining their community that way. And a huge way I think people define their community is through their college community, because those are the people that you're going to have those luxurious years with, to be able to be in a safe place to challenge yourself, for them to challenge you, and to bring out that best learning and that best knowledge. So I think, Kevin, there was many things obviously, but I think Cueva, what she would say is that she really put on top that community. She wasn't going to sacrifice great academics for it. I mean, I have to be honest, right? Everyone has she wanted a network, and she knew that the network coming out of Notre Dame was incredibly strong. Again, that goes back to community. It's community that wraps around you when you're there and when you come out. So I would say, you know, great education, all of those things, the football games, of course, she wanted all of that, but it all really came down to for her community.
You know, you've mentioned community, and I think both David and Kathleen talked about it. Kathleen, could you just speak a little bit to that community of learners, not just in the residence hall, but that a good classroom creates, and the experience at a university that encourages it?
Well, I don't have to go very far from Newman to think of his own motto, heart speaks to heart. And what a wonderful model for an educator to create in a classroom. And it's something I try to think of, try to cultivate in my own classroom, but I also admire so much the way that Notre Dame does that through its residence system and in a variety of ways. I also wanted to pick up on something Aisling said about purpose, and which is a sense that I see among recent students more and more. They want to feel as if they're part of something larger than themselves. They crave that. And I think that's what our Catholic intellectual tradition does offer, whether they are Catholic or not. And I think that that is something that that is part of being distinctively Catholic, that we invite people into conversation with that tradition in a very personal way. It's about, and we're finding new ways to do that, right? As we're, so many things like this are online, but we're creating communities in new ways. I know I've learned a lot as a teacher in the last the last 6 months. Although we're in person, we're also on Zoom sometimes, and we're able to do that. So we're harnessing technology for, to continue to do something that we've been doing a long time. We're trying to do it in better and new ways. And I think that's, my colleagues and I all have talked about the ways we've grown as professors as we've risen to this challenge and trying to do that. So I think finding new ways to create community in a time of separation and physical distance has been one really positive outcome of the last of the current crisis.
Father Dave, I'm going to ask you now a slightly troubling question. And you know, we talked about universities as being, you know, spaces where people can explore and learn from each other and all those great things. And yet there's a lot of evidence in recent years that students feel more under pressure than any other time. I believe, I could be wrong now, you can believe, whenever somebody says I believe, you know, they're lawyered up. Anyway, I believe that 60% of college students in America now report, you know, mental health issues, anxiety, and, you know, bits of depression, and just a sense. I find that you can see a lot of students who are extremely high performing academically, but I don't think they take joy in their accomplishments. And, you know, there's a lot of pressure and anxiety and just a low level kind of anxiety in the air in these, you know, in every competitive university, but in Notre Dame as well. So, Father Dave, what do you think about that? And is there something gone wrong with our education model if we have 60% of our students suffering from, you know, suffering in a way? Like, what's going on there, do you think?
It's certainly a complex question. I think a lot of it has to do with cultural implications. I think, to be honest with you, which is a whole other seminar, is the educational situation at the secondary level and how students are coming to colleges right now. I really resonate with the whole issue of community. Kathleen just mentioned it about her last 6 weeks. All you have to do is be around 3 colleges and universities in Notre Dame, Indiana, to understand the impact of COVID on literally over almost a couple thousands of people, literally. And I say that from this sense, it had to do with community. I was at a trustee meeting at Notre Dame when a report was being given after classes began again in August. And that report was very telling because it was pretty clear from all 3 student bodies, St. Mary's, Notre Dame, and Holy Cross, that they wanted to do in person because they commented that, okay, the virtual worked, we made it work, it wasn't easy, but it worked, but it isn't what we want. And the whole issue of in person, I believe, had to do with the being in the same place with the community. And I think that's why people have worked really hard to make sure that we're only 4 weeks away from the end of the semester, and we pretty much proved it out. So having said that, community is a thing I think students are desperately searching for. Home life is pretty hard to hear sometimes, both in clinical settings and even in sacramental settings. And I think that they have too much of a sense of urgency about their lives as opposed to curiosity. But it's certainly more complex than that. It's certainly a lot harder society to live in than when I was an undergraduate, and I would say even of the parents of these students, that's for sure. How do we respond to that? I think the best we can within our context.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
So Kevin, so I'm going to challenge you because you said mental health and a big percentage of people are, students need to get counseling and whatever. And then you said suffering. I think there's a bit of an old-fashioned way of thinking in some of that. I'm not sure that just because people are seeking advice and seeking someone to talk to in therapy necessarily suggests suffering. And I think we have to get more okay with it. It's more about community, right? Sometimes you need a safe person to talk to. Honestly, it's a role that we used to think of a lot of priests. So I'm not sure that the things have changed as much. There was someone there in a more informal capacity, and now perhaps we need to put a more formal name on it to be able to get that. And I think we have to support that. So that's one thing. On the other side of it, I think the burden is on all of us, just as the burden is in Silicon Valley, and we're learning we have to be able to hire. We want more full humans. We want humans with purpose. I think universities like Notre Dame also have to look at how they're making sure they are giving that experience. And it's not all about grades. I think we all have to be in this together. If we can make a decision not to only hire the kids who are the absolute top when it comes to grades, universities also have to make that decision to, when it goes back to letting kids into, looking for that different student. I remember, old time Ireland, Sister Antoinette, God bless her, said, I was the youngest of 5, and she used to always say, all the others really smart, and Aisling, well, she's got personality. And so at some level, I was, and nowadays, I've been in meetings with some of the most successful top venture capitalists in the world, and I'll answer some questions and they'll say, well, you're obviously really smart. And I'm like, I want to go, are you sure? Because I don't think Sister Antoinette thought so. So you have to have this. So I think the burden is on all of us to look at putting that experience to a place where we're really encouraging the learning and the pushing yourself into uncomfortable situations in learning in a safe way. And if therapy and the things that we wrap around it makes it safe to do so, let's do that. But I think it's time for all of us to actually change a little bit. I'll finish up by saying, there's a lot of businesses these days that are going out, they're claiming they're going out of business because of COVID. And for some, that's very, very true. For others, they were sloppy run businesses that might have been on life support anyway, and they were going to go out. I think the same is, and so you look at a company like Delta, I saw today, they had a loss of $5 billion and they were making $1 billion at this time last year. That's a business clearly was well run, but was affected by COVID. And so that happens. Universities are the same though. There's a bunch of universities that are just playing old, ways of doing it, old tapes and doing the same old thing and going in and putting in their time. There's also colleges that are truly trying to make a difference. I work with the STEAM program at Notre Dame, and I love the fact that, you hear a lot about the choice of whether it's academic for higher level learning or whether you want vocational type schools, and as if that's the big choice people are meant to make at 16, 17 years old. The truth is, you see a program like the STEAM program where they're exposing people to internships the whole way, and they're working those things into the classroom and that thought process. To me, that is an example of where we're combining them and we're looking at the overall well-being and exposing the student to this learning and this trying. So to me, anyway, it's just the burden's on all of us to continue pushing the boundaries to making more humanity, making a place for more humanity, more pragmatism in what we do. Sorry if I derailed things, Kevin.
No, that's wonderful. That kind of begins to answer a question we have from Nancy in Florida. We're going to try to get through a few of our questions from viewers. Newman differentiates, she writes, between knowledge and wisdom, something we spoke of a lot last week. In concrete terms, what does a course look like when it emphasizes wisdom, say an applied course in computer coding or engineering? I would say any one of you. A little bit, Kathleen, you were talking about Catholicism across the disciplines. What does it look like when a hard science course is working towards a sense of wisdom as well?
Well, I can tell you how I and the committee would evaluate a course that came in. I don't believe we've had one proposed yet from computer science, but but does it ask the big questions? In all of our disciplines, we're able to ask the big questions and to ask why. I think to points that were made earlier, I just think any class, the way, to the extent possible, to communicate that getting an A is not the best measure of success in this class. It's about what you learn. That's a hard thing to talk to undergraduates. And I think in many cases, it's because they've worked so hard to get here. They had to earn those really high grades. But how does the knowledge in any field make the world a better place? You know, we talked about a tendency among aspiring Catholic universities to seek legitimization from secular sources. And I will just say that there are a lot of people at great secular universities that look to places like Notre Dame with envy, because we can talk about what it means to be a force for good in the world. We want our students to be a force for good in the world. And I think that applies too in terms of the care we show for our students as whole people, that it's something we can use religious language. And in that sense, we have an advantage over many of the great secular universities to do that. So yeah, does it ask big questions? And do students have to think about how they would answer them? Not to reproduce something on a test to just spit out knowledge, but to actually engage that question and come up with their own answer. That's the goal of a course, not to get an A. Although sometimes they get an A anyway, but if they do it well.
Could I just possibly add to that, I think too, I used to do this with seniors at Notre Dame, living with them. They actually gain wisdom, and they usually are aware of it right before they're leaving the confines of Notre Dame. And what I used to do to them is ask them to differ, and it had to do with what they learned and what they know. As they were graduating seniors. I totally agree with Kathleen, but I do think, and I've seen this in young people, the synthesis and integration that we really would like to see in all education, even graduate education. I always say to their parents, you know, they'll have an aha moment when they're about 24, but don't expect the day after graduation that synthesis is going to be there. And for me, that's the difference also between wisdom and knowledge.
And Father, we have another question here now. This is from Roberta in Indiana. You might know where that is. But it's around that question, because community can be a very warm, fuzzy thing. But if there's a very tight community, you know, say a Catholic community or a university which is strongly Catholic, what happens then to, say, non-Catholic students, faculty, you say people who come from a non-Catholic background? You know, how do you maintain the community feel while at the same time recognizing diversity and the fact that people come from a very different set of backgrounds? How do you handle that challenge?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that it's not complicated, because it can be, but it shouldn't be. Certainly, there's been a lot of experience in the 60s of diversity of religions within Catholic institutions. And it has for me to do with the difference of being parochial and not parochial. If the raison d'etre for the Catholic University certainly is that dialogue with faith and reason, all sorts of people can participate in it. We have non-Christian students who are here with us at Holy Cross College, as well as Christians from other denominations. The community has to be all-encompassing. So it's sort of the way I would like to talk about communio, and remove it from any kind of sectarian definition. For Catholic students, it's something different. I hate to do this, but I'm going to give you an anecdote that people getting near decrepitude like to do. But when I was president of Portland, we advertised for a dean in engineering. And I was all excited because we had a sitting dean from another university in the Pacific Northwest applying for the position. In our ad, we said the successful candidate must understand the mission of a Catholic university. In his letter, he wrote, "Not only do I understand the mission of the Catholic University, I embrace it." Well, in fact, he was a cradle Muslim. And he was our dean for 14 years after that, and made a huge contribution. the community has to be embracing, and Catholic or not.
All right, I want to
And
thank
I
you
will,
all.
I'll
for-
jump in on that. Can I just add
Sure,
really
please.
quickly? I know you want to close at 11, but I will say, I mean, obviously I work in a very secular world. I love the fact that I can be proud to acknowledge that I'm a practicing Catholic in that secular world. And I think in general, among a lot of academics, there is a respect for the fact that when you, whether it's a computer language or something else, in this situation, a religion, if you learn it deeply and you become deeply in it, it allows you to respect and understand other languages and other religions, etc. Right? It's the same with anything. So I actually think it's one of those things that the more deep we are in Catholicism, the more we can actually learn to respect others and live that respect.
I would say my experience is, again, working with Father Tyson out at the University of Portland is where I first heard the phrase, we educate because we're Catholic, not necessarily because they are. And that school, but I think what it did was try to embrace the of Newman's idea of a university was to comfort the world and person, interact with everyone, and something of who out of faith. I want to thank you all for being here. I think it's again wonderful and to go on for months. To all sweet, specific to kind of pull off this Newman ideal with all the pressures that the modern world puts on higher education today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of our panel, and I hope we see you all again sometime in the near future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.